Check, check, check 1, 2. Audio looks good. Discord side, video looks good. Discord side. Let's check YouTube. And looks like video's good. Hopefully audio is good too. Apple's hitting highs. Good morning. It is Friday, September 22nd, 2023. This is a coding stream, and Apple is on highs here. What an interesting market the last week has been, hasn't it? A lot of range expansion, and we've even got significant down days. Here today, things very hesitant in the morning, but now starting to grind higher, starting to dip their toes into the longs, it feels like. Gonna have a lot of construction noise in the background here, as well as you're gonna have to deal with my voice here. But what's the trade for today? The one trade I made for today is this long in BABA, and it was very interesting. I made a lot of mistakes on it actually, and I'm looking forward to studying it and seeing what I can improve on later tonight and over the weekend, because I was looking at this BABA, big gap up, some news. Don't remember what the news was now, but positive news. Room to run, kind of beaten down, big gap up, and then holding that in pre-market, looking like it wants to go higher, and then buying coming in. They do a bunch of these dropouts, AMD hitting highs again, and I saw it finally thrust above its pre-market highs and bought it on a pullback right there. And they drove it to new highs, and this buyer was very tricky, flushed it immediately with a huge stop run. This whole wick is real. And I sat through that, and I was like, oh gosh, this is looking really bad. But it recovered almost instantly after that real stop run and started going to highs, but then it just ran into a wall here. And I just kind of lost my focus and got rid of most of my size right here and just kind of scratched the trade. That was a mistake. It ended up going and hitting my first target like right there shortly thereafter. So, and then I kind of just got disillusioned with the trade and wanted to focus on getting ready for the coding stream. Came back, beautiful spot to pick it up, and then the buyer really turned on the jets and just drove it basically a point higher, which is, I saw the buying and accumulation on that tape. So frustrating from where I'm sitting because I had this opportunity in my hands, firm, tight grip on both hands, and I totally let it slip through. And what could have been a really nice week maker trade ended up just being, a small win. So mistakes made, stuff to learn about. AMD is still going higher. We will get to coding. I'll just put a 99 high a day right there. And let's go ahead and start coding. Where's my Excalibur? I'll bring it down here. Let's go ahead and zoom out, and we'll start a new, oops, that's not what I wanted. I want to start a new one right here. And let's find our first question. First question is from Manny. Hello, Manny. Let me take a screenshot of your question and let's throw it into here. Manny says, are you a real coder? I am. I would like to speak, if you can speak about the performance and processing speed of various variable types. Oh, interesting. Very interesting topic. Specifically, what I mean is if you use an integer on a subgraph reference array versus an integer on a persistent int, what is the difference in performance? Okay, I understand that a persistent variable is not called at every tick, but somehow needs to be evaluated as well, so the CPU knows that it can't skip it. Hello, Manny. I like the question. There's a couple things that I'm going to, for lack of better phrasing, get straight here, because I think some ideas about how to use and what GetPersistentInt actually does, it might be confusing for a lot of people. It was confusing to me when I first tried to understand what it was doing, but um, yes, I mean, I don't know how you define real, but if you mean, have I been professionally coding for several decades? Yes, that's, yes, I have been an engineer for a long time. So, performance and processing speed of variable types. Let's go on to this question. So, variable data types vary from language to language. You know, for Sierra chart, we're talking about C++. C++ is known as what's called a strongly typed language. And what that means is that in C++, you need to really define, you need to think about, plan out, define, and really have control and understanding over what data types you're going to be using and how you're going to be using them. So, you know, you have an integer, which in C++ is referred to as an int. What other data types have you worked with? You've probably seen or worked with a float. You may have seen or worked with a string, etc., etc. You have the array that you mentioned here. So these are all data types that are available in C++. Now, the performance and processing speed of the various types, that question, I think what you're trying to ask is, um, are these the most efficient, is an integer the most efficient data type for storing integer-like information versus some other data type? I think that's what you're trying to ask. So storing a number in an integer versus storing a number in a string in C++, yes, the integer would be a faster and more streamlined and appropriate data type to hold a number. So let's say you needed to, for some reason, store user input, and you ask the user what is their favorite, what's their favorite number. And let's say they say my favorite number is 99, Wayne Gretzky. Well, if you wanted to store that user input, it's going to probably be coming from some kind of like command line input or something from their keyboard, right? So that's probably going to be coming in as a string. So it's actually probably going to be coming in as that. And in C++, this is not equivalent to this. Now, if we move to a language such as, you know, Python is very popular. Uh, what other, you know, PHP, which is also popular. JavaScript, also popular. Actually, JavaScript wouldn't really. No, you could with the var variable. I think you can have basically scalars. What they're called, scalars are variables that can be um, smart in quotes in the sense that they can handle a variety of different data types and just figure out behind the scenes for you. But let's say we're talking about like Python. Um, Python also uses scalars from my understanding, and you can store this 99 both ways, and Python kind of like figures it out for you. Same with PHP. When you're dealing with strongly typed language, and Python and PHP are not strongly typed languages. JavaScript has TypeScript, which is a strongly typed language, but there are other flavors of JavaScript which aren't. But we're getting way off topic with that. So coming back, this strongly typed C++, if you store 99, the user input, into an integer, then it's going to take some actions at the hardware level on the actual machine. And what it's doing is it's storing that value, 99, in the most compact, memory efficient way that it can be, which is into an integer. Um, and an integer is going to take up an amount of memory on the physical machine that is very declared and finite. A string can take up more memory because a string's length can be almost, you know, infinite. It's not going to have the same limitations that an integer would have, and that also depends on your computer architecture. So, in the sense of, can you speak about the performance and processing speed of various variable data types, dealing with if you have a bunch of numbers that you're dealing with, storing them as integers is going to be faster processing and moving them around memory than if you were to store those same integers as decimals, or if you were to store them as strings and then convert them back and forth. So hopefully that answers that first piece of the question. I specifically mean if you use an integer in this array versus an integer on GetPersistentInt. So one thing, let's clean this up a little bit. One thing about this SC subgraph ref that you should know, I believe, I have to double check this, but and maybe someone can tell me if I'm wrong. All of the SC subgraph ref arrays are of type floats. So they're all decimal based, and you can store integers into a variable that is a float. You can store 99 into a container that holds floats. It'll store it as 99.00, going on for however long. It will store it as a decimal in here, but you can store it. It's not as efficient as if you needed to store a list of integers. You could store it in an integer array, but if you're needing to specifically output stuff to subgraphs and draw and render subgraphs on your chart for maybe a volume indicator or whatever you're building, you have to use these subgraph array variables that they provide, that Sierra exposes. And so, yeah, you can store integers into here. They will end up looking like this, or more realistically, if you tried to print it out, it'll probably look like something like that. But that is how, so that's how you would put your integer values into the SC subgraph ref. Now, if you were not, Manny, if you are not trying to render or draw any of those values to a subgraph, either in a line or a bar, a histogram, whatever you're trying to build. If you're not trying to do that, then there are other ways to store a list of numbers than stuffing them into that subgraph. And that's what I think you're trying to get to with the GetPersistentInteger. And so let's talk about GetPersistentInteger. sc.getPersistentInteger. This is a function call that Sierra Chart exposes in their API. And what it does is there's a specific segregated block of memory, Sierra Chart memory block, that Sierra Chart exposes to developers to be able to store stuff in there so that you can retrieve it between calls to your study. So if you look at a timeline, let me make a timeline. This is time, and this let's say this is every time your study gets called. Let's say this circle represents every time your study gets called. Typically, this happens in slow-moving markets, at least on every execution or tick. In fast-moving markets, it can skip a couple ticks before it calls. Sometimes it's set to your chart update interval. Maybe you have it set at 50 milliseconds, maybe something else. But let's say this circle represents an event of your study getting called. And this is time. Time is moving forward, and your study is getting called here, 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 here. Okay, so your study gets called 4 times in this timeline here. And let's say you have a variable that you've calculated, and you've stored it in an integer, and you say it's my favorite number equals 99. And so you've calculated that on this run based on something. Let's say it's based on something happening, like let's say it's the high minus the low. This is pseudocode. Don't take this for exactly perfect code here. But let's say you calculated some value and you have it here, and I'm going to use the word locally. I'm going to put it in quotes, locally. You locally have it, this my favorite number. It is available locally for you here, just on this one run right there. But when you get to the end of that run of your study and another fresh tick comes in and your study is called again, this local variable is no longer going to be saved or accessible from this run. You can recalculate it afresh here, and you'll have the latest value here, but this won't be, whatever you had calculated back here on this run won't be available. Why? Because the variable goes out of scope at the end of the function run on this event. So that's why I said locally, because it is no longer in scope on this locale. It was here, but no longer here. In comes get persistent memory stuff. So let's say you needed to keep track, and you needed it to be persistent. So need a persistent variable to keep track of something. Maybe it's how many occurrences of some event that you are tracking in your code you need to keep track of, and you need to be able to access how many times you've seen it on subsequent calls to your study. The best way to handle that is not to throw it into the subgraph ref. No, you want to use this guy. You want to store, let's say it's an integer you're trying to store as a counter. You want to store it in this get persistent memory block. And so let's talk about what this actually does and how it functions. When you call sc.getPersistentInteger, and then you pass it an integer, let's from starting at 0 and going up to, I forget how many they expose for you. It's probably in the docs somewhere. But when you call that, what it's actually doing is it's saying inside of Sierra, it's saying, hey, this memory block right here, this is divided into various cabinets or mailboxes you can think of. So you have different cubbies of memory essentially here. And one of them is the 0 spot, and then there's the 1 spot, and then there's the 2 spot all the way to the nth spot, right? So nth spot, 0 element, 1 element, 2 element, etc., etc. So what you're doing when you make this call, get persistent integer of at spot 0, you're saying, hey, Sierra chart, go to that block of memory that you have that we can keep track of variables in between function calls to our study. And I want the address. I want the physical memory address. I don't want the value of what's stored in there. I want the physical memory address. And so in computer hardware, we have to do a little bit of computer hardware. Let's say this memory address is 01, and this one is 02, and this one is 03, etc. And these, think of these as mailboxes. Like if you went to a post office in whatever country you're in, and you saw post office box 1, 2, 3, these are going to be the representations of the virtual. This is the virtual representation of physical memory on your computer, sitting in the chips on your motherboard. And this is more of a logical array index representation of it. But this is the physical address that you're getting back when you call get persistent integer from cubby 0. So you say, hey, Sierra chart, give me the physical address for cubby 0. It says, where's cubby 0? Where's cubby? Oh, it's right here. Okay, what's the address for it? It's this address right here. Here you go, Frozen. There you go. I'm giving you back 001. Now, what good is that? Well, what you can do is you could declare an integer, and by putting an ampersand here when you're declaring it, my favorite number equals sc.getPersistentInteger 0. What you're saying here is I want to declare an integer called my favorite number, but rather than creating a new block of memory on the heap and just having that block of memory be assigned to this integer variable locally, like we did here, we put this ampersand in here. And this ampersand is saying, I want to declare an integer variable, but I want to actually have it pointing to the memory location that I'm setting this to, which we're getting back 001 from this function, right? This function is returning 001, memory location back to us, it's not storing 001 into my favorite number here, like the equals operator is operating on it. No, no, no. It's saying the address where we're going to store my favorite number is going to be 001, and that's what the ampersand does. If you took the ampersand away, then what you'd be doing is storing this physical address into the integer my favorite number, which wouldn't make any sense, and when you tried to print it out, it wouldn't make any sense. But because you put this ampersand here, you're saying whatever I'm getting returned here, which is this address, store or rather create an integer variable that stores its value in the spot that you are setting here. In other words, set the address to what this integer variable will be stored at, the mailbox that it'll be stored at, set the address to whatever I'm doing here. And so now what happens if you do this spot right here, this guy right here, I shouldn't put hello actually, but that mailbox right here, or this cubby right here, this is where you are going to be storing the value, the actual value of my favorite number. Why? Because we did GetPersistentInt, got the physical memory address, and created a variable that will be stored in that memory address's mailbox right here. So now when you say, hey, I've got my favorite number, and I need to add some value to it. Let's say I add 1 to it, or I set it to 1. I don't know. I set it to 1. What this does after you've done this, when you have something where you're saving to that integer, it's actually using that mailbox's memory address to store that value now. So the 1 will go right there. And then on the next run here, when you say get the persistent integer from mailbox 0, it will create a local variable called int my favorite number, but it's going to be pointing to this mailbox which you on the previous run stored a value in of 1. And so now on this run, let's say you want to increment it on every run, right? Let's say you have my favorite number plus plus, so it'll be 0, and then after this run's done, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. On this run, you'll get it, and then when you print out my favorite number on this second run, it's going to say 1, and then you're going to increment it, and what's that going to do? It's going to bump it to 2, because it's pointing to this permanent persisting memory block rather than getting lost locally because the scope of that function ended. And then on the third run here, let's move to this one, it's going to again say, hey, I have GetPersistentInt. It's in cubby number 0. Let's go to cubby number 0. Give me that memory address. Here's the memory address. Let's make a local variable called my favorite number, and we're going to set the memory address of it to 001, and then I'm going to dump out whatever that value is. Oh, it's 2. Let's increment it. Now it's going to be 3. Now you're at the end of this function run, and so on. So that was a really long introduction into get persistent memory. But if you have integer variables that you need to store, but you're not trying to actually render them, don't store them in the subgraph reference. At least I don't think that makes sense. I think you're better off storing them in persistent memory. Yeah, performance difference. So I think it's going to be negligible with today's computers, but from a purity and also understanding what you're doing point of view, this block of code, or this block of memory, it's all declared as integer blocks of memory. So this is essentially the most efficient way to store integers. Versus if you were to store integers in here, this array is significantly larger than this one because an SC subgraph reference array is an object which is going to be a custom data type, not a primitive data type like an integer or a float or a string. It's going to be a custom data type, so it is going to be larger memory footprint for one instance of that variable. And then floats themselves, the actual array in here, they're decimals. They take up more width of memory on the on the physical resources than an integer would. So yes, if you were to look at it from if it was a test on a test question on an exam for computer science, yes, there is a performance difference. Um, you will have better performance and cleaner performance using an array of integers like this versus storing integers into a more bloated object like this. Um, so there's a follow-up question here on the same topic, and let me just grab a screenshot of that. And so we covered this. Moving down to here, um, can ranges be stored in single persistent memory locations? So I'm assuming you mean two numbers. When you say range, you mean two numbers, right? Like from X to Y or from A to B. So you cannot store two integers into one cubbyhole. This cubbyhole can only fit one integer. Think of it as a post office box that can only fit one letter. You will not be able to fit two letters into this post office box. It won't fit. You will need to use a second post office box to fit the second letter. Um, Manny replies, makes sense, thanks. I mostly use persistent due to subgraphs are limited to 60 subgraphs. I might use them more. Yeah, so if you start doing a lot of subgraph references just for the purpose of storing data, um, I don't know what you'll see from performance-wise, but I would not be surprised if you saw some degradation because these are probably intertwined with other CRCHAR code in a way that is going to be more expensive processing, signal-wise than just storing an integer array. So um, again, it's probably negligible with how fast computers are these days, but this is the correct way, and this is the sloppier way, if you will. Good questions, guys. Good questions. Okay, who's next? Who's got it next? Let me take a sip of coffee here. Next questions.
I've frozen. Hope it was a good week.
Hey,
Yeah, I could ask a question, but since I talked so much last time, I'd prefer if anybody else had their questions first.
go for it. No, ask away. I'll type it out as you go. Go for it.
Okay. This is really more for entering. This is more about your sort of workspace and how you go about interacting with the compiler in Sierra Chart. If I have Visual Studio up and running, and you want to use the compiler to step through the code, it seems like with Sierra Chart, you're kind of forced to save it, put it in the file where most of those raw CPP files go,
Hmm.
and then remote run it for every single change. I'm just wondering if you have any tips and tricks on how to use the tools more effectively, or is that just as good as it gets?
Yeah. Very good question. There's Okay. Let's do it this way. I am I am firmly in the camp of do what works for you, and that's whether it is uh, a high school student trying to figure out what they're going to do after high school, or a trader trying to decide what trading style they want to trade, or a coder deciding which compiling and environment setup that they wish to, use and work within, what ecosystem they want to work in. So my philosophy is Hakuna Matata, do whatever works for you. For me, I started with just using Vim as a text editor and using the remote compiler just to get started. Why? Let's do the pros and cons. Pros and cons. So the pros of using that was just a simple text editor, no need to install anything beyond Sierra Chart, and um, no need to know anything about C++ compilers or like you really this is like this remote compiler option is such a good way for beginners to start because you really are protected from all of the Visual Studio um, advanced features that can also cause a lot of confusion and feeling overwhelmed. Like I remember the first time that I was working in Visual Studio, I just felt really overwhelmed. I coded low level and also
Like
a bunch of other stuff, but I always used Vim as a text editor. I didn't really ever use an IDE. But for
even
those,
to this day.
no, no. So it's changed. I'm going to get into that side. So I would say this is a great way for beginners to start out. So beginners start here is what I would recommend. I mean, do whatever you want, but this
From there, I'm going to take your advice on that part, although I'm interested on the next stages. The reason is I will say Visual Studio, I almost couldn't figure out where to even type in the thing
right,
for.
right. So you don't need to use Vim. You don't need to use this text editor. You can use, I think, what do they have? Notepad++ is the
Right.
one that they install default for Sierra. You can use VS Code. Um, you can use whatever you want. You can use Notepad. Use smoke signals for all I care. Just
Mhm.
all you need to do is put your C++ file into ACS source and then click remote compile and you're done. I mean that's super easy. So what are the drawbacks? The cons for this. Um, the cons for this are you're limited. You're limited in what you can do with this to a certain degree. If you want to create more advanced studies that feature multiple modules or what's referred to as like object-oriented programming, just buzzwords. I don't want to use buzzwords, but if you're trying to do more complicated, larger projects, you're going to start running into very quickly the limitations of the remote compiler. So if you try to use third-party libraries or vendor libraries, you're going to run into issues with the remote compiler. If you're going to try to use code that needs to use some kind of special compiler settings, you're going to run into issues with the remote compiler. If you want to use, well, no, I think that's really the limitations. You're limited. You're limited. You can't do the more advanced stuff, but you can still do a lot of damage. I mean, um, I didn't start using Visual Studio for my Sierra Dev stuff until rather recently, like last few months. I didn't start using it until I started getting into the more like complex projects that have multiple moving pieces, moving modules, stuff running inside and outside of Sierra Chart, integrating to third-party systems, etc. Like you can't get that done with the remote compiler, and it is a lot easier to manage those types of complex, sprawling projects on the Visual Studio side, and I'll get into the whole Visual Studio thing. So that's the limitations of the remote compiler. But if you are trying to just write your own Hello World first Sierra chart thing, by all means, you please use a text editor. You do not need the complexity of Visual Studio to be overwhelming you while you're trying to just get on your feet and start walking, crawling, and then walking. Um, this side is more like crawl and walk, and this is a run and sprint side.
Got it.
So if you're not crawling or walking yet, I mean, do what you want, but I would recommend people wait until they actually need the advanced features of something like um, IDE like Visual Studio provides. So going over to the Visual Studio side of things, um, what are the pros? The pros come, there's a lot of them. One, it's a heavily used IDE. So what does that mean? There's documentation and um, tons of Stack Overflow articles. It's so heavily documented, the various things with Visual Studio. So yes, you have a more complex set of features that you need to navigate, but you're also supported by more documentation online, whether that's, like I said, Stack, Reddit, whatever, Google, just there's tons of people asking questions about how to use Visual Studio. Secondly, you want to do more advanced stuff, like bring in uh, third-party libraries, etc. Doing this in Visual Studio is significantly easier than doing it on the remote compiler. Um, Maybe it's worth doing an entirely separate video on how to do that, all that kind of stuff. That's getting into really more um, advanced stuff. But bringing in third-party libraries and external stuff to be able to use in your code, and then also export it um, and the different ways that you can export it, because you can bundle it into the DLL that you're building for Sierra, or you can build it into a dynamic library or even a static library that you're calling. Well, if it was a dynamic library, you'd be calling out to it, and if it was static, you'd be bundling and compiling it into your DLL. So you have a lot more options of how you package your deliverable, that final DLL, using Visual Studio. And then I think one of the big ones that a lot of people rely on, I do less so. It's the what is it called? IntelliSense? I don't know how to spell it, but it's the thing. I don't have Visual Studio open. It's the thing in Visual Studio that, like, you type uh, sc.get, and then it goes, oh, you meant get persistent integer? It auto
Right.
suggests, oops, whatever, you get the idea. It auto suggests um, what the function calls are based on what you're typing. So a lot of people use this and enjoy using that, and it is helpful, especially when you're starting out. But I do not, in my opinion, IntelliSense is not worth the price of entry of this over this. Um, if you mistype a function call and you try to use the remote compiler, it will yell at you and say, "Hey, you mistyped this. That we don't know what this is." It's reactive. It's not um, proactive like IntelliSense is. It's not going to spit out in Visual Studio like a list of errors in the little error window saying, "Hey, you mistyped this online, blah blah blah." No, you'll have to try the remote compile, and you'll see that it didn't compile because there was a syntax error, and it'll tell you what line that happened on, and you go fix it, and then you try to remote compile again. In Visual Studio, this is more proactive, and it sees. Although there is a caveat to that, it does get these things wrong sometimes, and it'll tell you something's wrong when something isn't wrong, and sometimes it'll tell you nothing's wrong when there's a bunch of stuff wrong. So IntelliSense isn't always correct or perfect. So that's something to keep in mind.
One
From the
question on that.
Yeah,
I was curious this, the let's say I graduate down the road to using that. The IntelliSense was the main feature that I was interested in, of course, but does it have the ability to go and look for the custom SC functions and variables and all that? Do you
yes,
load that in? Ah,
yes,
okay.
yes, it does, and the way that it does that is pretty cool too, and that's why people really like it. Also, it will, if you add third-party libraries, it will see the functions in them as well. It
Okay.
scans. Like, so at the top of all of your ACSIL studies, you do something like include
Now it's good.
Sierra chart.h, or it's something similar to that
Yep.
at the top of all your C++ files, right? What Visual Studio does is it says, hey, I see an include file. Let me go dig into here and see all the function calls and what data types they're expecting. And I'm going to just create a map in IntelliSense. And then when the programmer is writing get persistent, and I will go and check my map of different function calls and all the different included libraries and I will present them as that IntelliSense. So yes, to your question.
Okay. I'm glad I asked because I was going down the road of trying to learn Visual Studio while learning CPP, while hacking some code together, and it just eliminated a headache. So I'll keep it simple until the project basically outgrows the the usefulness of a simple compiler. Was
Yeah,
there an advantage to Vim over Notepad plus plus or whatever they have?
no. Um, and in fact, I think there's some text editors that even offer check out VS Code because I think it's kind of in between um, a text editor and IDE, and I think it does provide some IntelliSense, but without the overhead of Visual Studio.
I'll look
Also, I
into it.
think what is it? Is it Sublime Text? I think also has some IntelliSense typey features. I think this is trademarked by Microsoft, but I think they have some auto suggests for just C++, not for. The nice thing about Visual Studio is that the IntelliSense goes into all the includes in all the
Right.
libraries. I don't think Sublime does that. I don't think Notepad++ does that. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, maybe there's plugins you can get for Notepad++
Right.
or Sublime. The reason I use Vim is very simple. It's been around since the 1960s, 70s, and it's installed on literally every single Unix machine in the world.
Got it.
And as an engineering student who was on the Unix machines, I had to spend a lot of time on them, and uh, my first job, my my boss, I was actually an intern for them. My boss was a genius, and he taught me how to use Vim like a power user. He my first few weeks of onboarding there, actually it may have been my first month or two. He didn't actually have me working on anything of substance. He had me just doing Vim tutorials
Funny.
because Vim uses different modes, and so you can perform a lot of actions very quickly. Let me let me open something up here just to show. Okay, here, here, here's Vim. Again, this has been around for decades and decades, and I think this gentleman just passed away like a week or two ago. But here I am in what's called normal mode, and you know I'm in normal mode because there's a block that's blinking. And if I enter what's called insert mode by pressing the letter I, you see that my block turns into a cursor, and you can see
Right.
down here I am now in insert mode. And so the beauty of Vim is, again, this was built before there were mice. It was all keyboard input. And so when I'm using Vim, I don't take my hands off the keyboard ever because I don't need to use the mouse. So I can jump between regular mode and insert mode. I can go into insert mode and say hello world, and then jump into regular mode, copy that without pressing Control C, and then paste it. I can paste it 3 times. I can
Huh.
jump to the beginning of the next word. I can grab that word. I can jump to the bottom of the file and paste that word down there. I can jump to the top of the file, bottom of the file easily. I can jump to the top of the file and do a vertical select of just the word hell and
Huh.
then take it out. But then if I wanted to copy that somewhere else, I could go paste it down there. And I'm just using
Right.
very, very few keyboard shortcuts, but they are ingrained in me after multiple decades of using this application every single day. I do, I mean, I've been an engineer for a long time. I've built a lot of different stuff, whether it's super low level C uh, scripts to Perl scripts to websites to full fledged trading systems just using Vim. So it's not the text editor you use. It's how you use it. But I guess what
Uh-huh.
my point is that you don't need to use Vim. You can just use a regular text editor. I use it because I am much faster in it, and when I have code, um, when I have code in here that I need to move around very quickly, it makes things significantly easier. So let's say let's close this out, and then let me open something. Okay, here is a Vim file from some prior coding stream, tutorial 5. But let's say I want to take everything between this squiggly brace and this squiggly brace, and I want to copy it. Well, I don't need to pick up my mouse, and I don't need to go like this, dragging it. Oh, shoot, I got it wrong. I need to start over.
Uh-huh.
Ah, no, I got it wrong again. Like, I don't need to do that. I can just go bloop, 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 and I'm done. And now I can come down here, paste. If I want to find every instance of the word graph, and I want to turn it into banana, I can do that really quickly. Again, I didn't take my hands off the keyboard. So this is why I use Vim, is because after you get over the huge um, learning curve, you are
It's just
just lightning
it's a
fast.
heaven for keyboard
Yes,
shortcut
yes.
guys. Yeah,
If you
gotcha.
do not like to use keyboard shortcuts, do not use Vim, because it is all
I'm a
about those keyboard shortcuts.
I'm a shortcut guy, but is that available on Windows or Linux only?
It's for free for everybody. You
Oh,
can
okay.
it is pre-installed as part of the most Unix operating systems. I believe even Apple iOS has it pre-installed as VI.
Okay.
So that's the reason why it's so useful, is because it's been around for decades and it's just everywhere, other than Windows machines, but you can download it for Windows. I use this version called GVim, which means graphical Vim, just because if you want to use your mouse, you can. Like also. So
Yep. These are
um,
great tips. Thank you.
you're welcome. But no, you don't have to use Vim. Again, you can just use Notepad. You can use Notepad++. You can use any text editor you want. All it needs to do is be able to save text. That's all it needs to do. So that's it. Okay. Um, Manny has a follow-up question, I think, of this. Remote compiler often or usually produces faster studies. Is my assumption correct that the remote compiler would be more optimized to see our chart, which Visual Studio Compiler will not be able to achieve? Um, I I would contest this piece. I don't think this is true. I don't think using the remote compiler inherently makes your studies faster. No. A compiler's job is to take raw code and the target architecture that you're going to be running that code on and turn that code into machine language so that your computer can execute the instructions that you have written in your code. So it takes, you say int test equals 1, and the compiler ends up turning that into whatever, instructions that the machine needs to run. And I'm really obfuscating all the complexity involved in here, but if you want to get into that, you can go look into how compilers work and how operating systems work, etc. But in the short version, that's what happens, okay? Um, and the Visual Studio compiler is no, it's not going to be producing slower studies, because in the end, the compilers are all doing the same thing. They're taking a list of human instructions and converting it to machine instructions. And the machine instructions are going to be um, whatever the most efficient version of this human instruction translation that it can come up with. So no, the remote compiler will not produce faster studies. Um, is the remote compiler more optimized to Sierra chart? So I'll answer this with yes asterisk. Yes, but that's because it is specifically built for Sierra chart. It doesn't mean that using the Visual Studio compiler is not optimized for Sierra Chart. It's just that what Visual Studio is built by Microsoft, who doesn't know or care what Sierra Chart is. And the remote compiler was built by Sierra Chart's engineers specifically for Sierra Chart. So yes, it is specifically optimized for Sierra Chart in that sense. But the Visual Studio compiler should be able to accomplish everything. I mean, it does accomplish everything that you can with the remote compiler, but it also allows you to accomplish more. So, like we talked about up here, um, using the third-party libraries and getting those included, that's where the Visual Studio IDE is going to be really handy, is the management of third-party libraries that you're bringing in, and you can do other things with Visual Studio, such as I forgot what they're called. I think they're called like before build hooks, after build hooks. You can have Visual Studio perform some actions. Like I have a hook, an after build, or they're called build events. That's what they're called. I have a build event in Visual Studio that copies my DLL that Visual Studio compiled directly into my Sierra chart data folder, so I don't have to, manually open up the Visual Studio directory and click and drag. So I use the various features that a full IDE has to make your pipeline of building more efficient. Um, do I type with a traditional QWERTY keyboard? Um, that's funny. Yes, I type with a regular American English layout QWERTY keyboard. I will say, and you probably can hear, I'm using a keyboard that has buckling springs. Design, this is like the old IBM Model M keyboards. If you don't know what that is, go Google that. So I have a huge honking thing. I mean, you could knock somebody out with this thing. Like, if someone invaded your home and you had nothing, no weapon around, you could pick this keyboard up and probably knock them out with it. That's how heavy it is. It is heavy. It's a big, heavy keyboard, and you can hear it. It clickety, clackety. And those are springs that are buckling every time I press the key, and it has like a point in here where you put a certain amount of downward force, and the spring like cracks. You can hear it. Um, and that's why they call it a buckling spring. You don't need to use that. You can use any keyboard. Use, just like I said with everything else, use whatever works for you. Use what's good for you. I like old, loud keyboards, apparently. Speed difference was an observation. No, maybe I'll post an example later if I have one. Okay, sounds good. Okay, let's do one more question, and then I'm gonna head off to work business. My brother works for, threw away 20 of those old keyboards. Oh no. Oh no. Yeah, those things are going. Check out eBay. Those are going for money now. There's a company that builds the, I think they're called Unicomp. I'm not affiliated with these guys, but I have spent a lot of money there. So they make great gifts for people who are uh, computer nerds like me. Um, a nice buckling spring keyboard, and they're heavy. Again, they're heavy. They're like little weapons. Um, but these Unicomp keyboards are like the old Model M IBM keyboards, and they have buckling springs, and they're great. They're fantastic. Um, okay, one more question, and then I'll bid you guys a happy Friday. Who's next?
I've plenty of questions to fill the blank space, but I'm always trying to see if anybody else will chime in.
Let's see if Belligerent has a question, and if not, then Humble, I'll take your last question, and we'll close it out on that. So Belligerent's typing here. I'm not sure if he has a question or they have a question, or do you type with perfect QWERTY finger placement or do you deviate from that? That's also an interesting question because when I was leading engineering teams before I left the corporate world, I had an exercise for all the engineers, the junior and mid-level, and even senior engineers who are under me, um, that I think is very important. I think typing speed is very important if you're a programmer. If you're doing the one finger, index finger typing mechanism, and you are a programmer, or you're aspiring to be a programmer, you need to go get yourself up to speed. So every day, for our stand up with the teams, there used to be this web app. I don't know if it's still around. I think it's called like Type Racer, but it's and it works for folks who are distributed around the world as well. So your team can log into this website. It's free, and then everybody gets a little car. Like everybody gets to pick out their little car, and then there's like a little racetrack that's very simple. It's just like this, and then here's the finish line right here. And then everyone's got their little car, and then here they give you a quote from some book or a novel or a news thing, and it's ipsum lorem, whatever. It's not actually Latin. It's in English, and you type in what you're seeing as fast as you can with as few errors as you can, and every time you type something correctly, your little car moves forward. And so it was a really fun way to get my team woken up in the morning, and then also engaged in some friendly competition, but also improving their typing skills. And I saw some of the weaker typers improve from like 40 to 60 words per minute. Uh, not their improvement wasn't 60 words per minute. They went from 40 words per minute to 60, so an improvement of 20. And 60 is still slow for a professional programmer. But oh yeah, there it is. There it is. Perfect. Yes, let me copy that. Here you go. There you go. So really fun way to just have some friendly competition with your friends or team or even by yourself, and just try to um, get your typing to a better place. So recommend that for just some good old fun with various teammates. But back to your question, do I type with finger placement? Yes, I typically have my left index finger on the J and or sorry, on the F, and then my right finger on the J, and I do hold typical typing. Um, Maybe we should do Type Racer next coding stream, everybody. Well, hell, let's just do it right now. Let's do it right now. Type Racer. I'll send the link out so everyone has it. Because I think you need to. Hold on a second. We'll end on this, right? We're supposed to enter a typing race. Waiting for more people. There's a way to. Oh, you have to create an account in order to have. Do I have? Hold on a second. Let me see if I have an account. Oh, I do. But it's using my name, and I don't really want to broadcast that over the internet right now. Okay, but you can create an account and and go do this. Oh, there's a race starting, guys. Let's do this thing. 3, 2, 1. It is more difficult. Oops. To pretend that you do have feelings when you don't, apostrophe, than to pretend you don't have feelings when you do. And that's slow for me. 98. So typically I'm in the 115 range, but yeah, fun, and you can race against other random people, so um, go for that. Do you use? I practice. Oh, Morphos has a suggestion for another one called keyboard. Um, so there's another one called KeyBR for that. And do you use your right pinky for the backspace key, or do you use a different finger? Let me check. Uh, Hello world, backspace. No, I actually don't. Huh. No, I use my fourth finger. Belligerent. I use my fourth finger for the backspace. Um, Maybe because my pinky is, I don't know. It's easier for my fourth finger to get there. Again, do what works. Um, Everyone and their brother will tell you to do what's right. Do what works. Do what works. All right, guys. Do you think Seer chart will get affected by a Windows 10 update? I had shortcut issues yesterday, but I remember I updated Windows. I doubt it. I doubt it. Yeah, I doubt that that's related. So, all right, guys. Have a good weekend, and see you next week.